above his Lord. It is enough for the disciple that as he be a minister and the servant as his Lord. If they have been called the master of the houses of Beelzebub, how much more shall they that call them of his household? In essence, what Christ is saying there is, look, I have been persecuted. They've been calling me that I get this power out of Satan. How much more are they going to? What are they going to do to those that are following me? Okay, so there's going to be persecution. Today, what I want to focus on is in verses 26 through 31. And here Jesus gives the disciples practical help in the midst of persecution and suffering. And these are the teaching continues to the end of the chapter, but there's 6 truths to stand on during persecution. We're just going to look at the first 3 of them. I liken these truths that we can stand on to stakes that one puts into the ground. I think of a new development. You drive through a new development, you see all the pretty houses, but what you see is brand new trees, right? They're putting up those trees, and what do they do with those trees? They stake them to the ground. They have 3, 4 different lines going to a stake that's into the ground. You ever driven through a new development after a windstorm? You know which trees didn't have stakes in the ground, right? They're blown over. They're toppled over. Even the news this last week, there was a windstorm that hit the northeast, and boy, there were some big mature trees that had fallen down on houses and things like that. At times, trees need stakes in order to hold them up and to support them. And you know what? At times in our own lives, we need the truth of God's Word to help support us. Do we not? And especially when you're going through times of persecution or suffering. And the Lord knows that his disciples are going to be walking through these ways. And so here he is going to give them some truths to stand on. Okay, so this morning, first of all, let's look at the first one he gives in verse 26. Here is that the truth will be known. The first principle or truth to stand on is that the truth will be known. Verses 26 and 27, it says this: Fear them not, therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. What I tell you in darkness, that speak ye in the light, and what ye hear in the ear, that preach ye upon the housetops. Jesus is talking about that there are some that are covering things up. There are things that are being done, deals in darkness. There are secret whispers that are happening. Jesus was specifically talking about the Pharisees at that time. They arrested and tried Jesus in the early dark hours. They had pretty much a kangaroo court. They tried to cover up his resurrection by spreading the rumor that his body was stolen. Matthew, remember, records that for us at the end of his gospel. They slandered Christ to be a worker of the devil, but they would then reveal that they were really just misguiding and defaming him. And so the Lord here, he says, look, the truth will be known. It will be revealed, all that we've done. There's 2 principles out of this truth that we can glean. First of all is that God knows about the things that we've done. He is the all-knowing one. And he will bring it to justice. Numbers 32:23 says, Be sure your sins will find you out. That the appropriate punishment for not obeying the Lord will eventually be meted out. Like what Matthew said earlier in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, hey, go and get that right before the judge takes action to get it right. Galatians 6 says, God is not mocked. You'll reap what you sow. He sees all and will judge all. Matthew 12:36, again with the same idea of judgment, says, every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give an account therefore in the day of judgment. You think about all of the illustrations in the Bible of men and women that have tried to cover up their sin. Adam and Eve could not hide behind trees. Achan could not bury his treasure deep enough. David could not cover up his sin through murder and political maneuvering. Jonah could not put enough distance between him and the Lord. Ananias and Sapphira tried to cover up a real estate deal and to bring false glory to themselves. And even in the day of the church, the Lord was not deceived and struck them dead. God's justice gives us comfort when we obey him. But boy, it gives us fear when we oppose him, does it not? And the Lord knows he'll bring the truth to light. And we ought to make sure that we are right with the Lord. And that because we realize that there is nothing that's done in secret that won't be made known. But not only is it applied to the wicked, but also it is applied to those who bring and preach the gospel. And I think that this was the majority of what the Lord was saying here because of verse 27. He says, what I tell you in darkness, that speak in the light. Here he's talking about, hey, I am teaching and helping you and to understand what God's will is and what God's plan is and his story. And I want you to tell others about it. Don't think it's copyrighted by me only, right? But I want you to spread the good news. The Pharisees and others opposed this message of Jesus, and they were doing all that they could to dispel it and to stop it. The death of Jesus Christ and other martyrs in histories yet, though, did not stop the gospel, but actually spread the gospel. Even in Acts 4, this will become a reality of a persecution to them. Peter and John will be told to be silent. And what was their response? Do you remember? How can I not talk about what Christ has done? Right? We must come to that point, which is it better to listen to God or men? And Jesus answers this question even to a greater extent in the next truth that will help us to stand in the midst of persecution. We find that in verse 28. So it says here in verse 28, and fear not them which kill the body, but are able to kill the soul. I'm sorry, let me start over. And fear not them which that kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. But rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Here in verse 28, he's talking about that your eternal destiny is secure in Jesus. Remember that. It is difficult to stand when we trust in oneself and we don't know the future. When our health becomes ill, when our earthly relationships become sour, or they're lost because of death, when our finances are gone, when our life seems uncontrollable, when our way is threatened, we often lash out and be willing to do anything in order to gain back that which we are pursuing and think is so important. Boy, many folks end up in a difficult place when they pursue after pleasures, whether that's gambling or alcohol or drugs. There is death that comes in every relationship. In the beginning of a commitment of marriage, right? It says, till what? Till death doeth part. There is when death happens, the security of wealth is no more. We seek and we do all that we can to remain healthy, yet death is inevitable. Christ puts this threat of death in perspective, does he not? death of this body is inevitable, but death of your soul is decisional. Make sense? Fear the greatest threat, which is not the inevitable of a physical death, but that which is decisional and placement of your eternal soul. Where will it be? And it helps us to remember us that, hey, this life is not the end. This isn't the best that it's going to get. My best days are yet still before me. The prime of my life isn't behind me, but is yet before me one day when I walk with Christ. And we got to remember that. And that reality that our eternal destiny is secure, because it helps us to stand even before the most heinous threats of death, because there is only one that holds the authority of where our soul will go. Not only did the disciples experience threats from giving out the gospel, others from ancient to modern day history have been martyrs for the gospel. In recent history, there were missionaries that went to the country of Ecuador to reach tribes. They were very well educated. They went to Bible school. They had studied linguistics to aviation. And they knew the risk. They wanted to reach a tribe for the gospel. This tribe was hostile to outsiders. They had killed before, and they killed them. A few days before the risk of death became reality, Jim Elliot wrote this in his journal. He said, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot what? Lose." Very famous quote. You see, he had found this principle, this truth in verse 26 to be true. That the threat of death is greatly minimized when we realize that physical death is going to happen anyways, but also that our security is not in this life, but it is in God, who holds the security of our soul. The security of our soul with Christ is permanent. Ephesians 1:13 talks about the sealing or the down payment of the Holy Spirit that we have within us. You guys are going through 1 Peter. You're going to talk about how there it is reserved and protected from corruption, our inheritance in the Lord. John 14 talks about how Jesus is going to prepare, the King James talks a mansion, a home, a dwelling place for us in heaven. The security of our souls. Don't fear those that threaten death. Fear God, the judge of both this life and the one to come. Then he adds not only to this principle of having the right priority of death and where our soul will go, but he adds also to the character of this judge of souls. Boy, we get in trouble here on earth, and we go before a judge, and he has to have the wisdom of understanding the circumstances and the law and puts that all together. But we have to rely on that guy's character and his ability to do that. We have a much better judge. We have a much greater judge that has all wisdom. But look at this judge, because in this life, that judge, I'm just another just another line on his list to do that he needs to get done if I'm in trouble before him, right? But look at the character of God here at verse 29 to 31. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear ye not, therefore. Ye are more value than many sparrows. So here he's giving an illustration of God's character and how much he values these disciples. And he's comparing them. He says, look, the judge of all the earth, he knows about the sparrow that dies and falls to the ground. Now, 2 sparrows were sold for a penny in those ancient days. It was the least valued bird, sold for the least monetary value. And if God knows of their death, God knows of the struggles that we're going through too. And then he uses verse 30, says, but the very hairs on your head are numbered. And it is the hairs on my head, when it comes down to the significant things of life, can be very insignificant, right? It isn't the most important thing about my health. If that's the worst problem I have in my health issues, that doesn't rank high up there compared to like the heart and such, right? And it is an insignificant detail about your body. Yet the Lord knows about it. What he's saying here in verse 31, he says, fear ye not, therefore, you are more value than many sparrows, than a flock of sparrows. If God knows the death of insignificant birds and he knows the insignificance of facts of your body, how much more will he be concerned about the significance of your life, the struggles that you're going through, and certainly the moment of death that you face? Because you are more valuable than sparrows. At times, loneliness can overwhelm our lives. A sense of uselessness can depress us. And our motivation to live and to continue to thrive. And it affected one man. I don't know how well he was known here. This man's name was Dave Dervecki. He was a pitcher for the San Francisco Giants. He was pitching one day and he threw and his arm broke as he threw. And the doctors looked at him and he says, well, you got cancer. And so then he went through the cancer treatments, and it had come down there to amputate part of his muscles, but amazingly he was able to come back and pitch in the majors. Any of you guys remember this story? This was a while back. I was a teenager, so 20-ish years ago. And when he came back to pitch, he pitched again, and in one of his pitches, his whole arm, it was like it didn't fall off, but it broke again, but just right in half. Well, he went back to the doctors, and they looked at it, and they said, hey, the cancer has come back. And the next time you saw him in the dugout, he was without an arm. They had to amputate his whole arm. And he wrote a book that had to do with that experience, and it was an interesting read if you're interested in some of the difficulties that a sports player had gone through. But he wrote another book that I thought was really interesting that was called The Worth of a Man, where he writes about his struggle to find value. His whole life, from a little kid all the way up to adulthood, was about becoming a baseball player and pitching. And he became a very good baseball player, but in a matter of months, that of who he was and his occupation was taken away from him. And he talks about how his value was wrapped up in being a baseball player. Often we find value in our jobs. We say, hey, look what I did. Look what I'm doing. We find value in our children, in our social status, in our hobbies. Some of us find value in what our parents had thought or are thinking of us. And when those hobbies, when those statuses are taken away, we wonder, well, I don't feel like there's any worth here anymore. And that can become overwhelming, and sometimes folks go through a battle of depression even. And even now, the tag word that's been talking about is talking about our identity, right? What is our identity? Folks, don't base your worth, don't base your identity in anyone but the Lord and your eternal relationship in Him. You see, God is the one who values us. He says here, for you are not, therefore are ye, let me say this again. Fear ye not, therefore. Ye are more value than many sparrows. God knows of your difficulties. God's going to know. And He's planned that storm that you may be going through. And He knows of the persecutions you may be facing. He knows of your limitations that you have. God values you enough that Jesus died for you. That Jesus dies for you. How much are you worth? How great is your identity in the Lord when you know that you have been paid for through Jesus Christ? That you are worth being redeemed for. We just went on a trip to Washington, D.C., and we have all these memorials of folks who have fought in different wars. You think of the value of these wars, because countries, they fight wars over land and resources, ideals like freedom. And many men die, and we value whatever it is that we decide to fight over. And we send men and now women in, and they die for that which we are desiring. Folks, God has battled for you. That's how much He valued you, to the extent that He sent His own Son, Jesus Christ, to die for you, to redeem you, to adopt you, so that you might know the love of God. He fought even to the death of Jesus. You can look at Ephesians chapter 1 and do a study on your own there, and tells you how much that God values you today. But base your worth, base who you are and your identity on God. That you are more valuable to Him than even the sparrows, the small birds. God knows of the difficulties. You see, in the times of persecution and in the times of suffering, we need to turn to the character of God. Because He is a judge who deals with a full disclosure environment. The truth will be known. In verse 26, He says, that which is covered up, He knows. It'll be revealed. He is a judge that has full authority both over death and soul. Even the greatest judge of the land can only sentence you to death. He can do nothing with your soul. He judges with a high value for your life. He values you greatly, knowing even the insignificant facts and events that some of us have forgotten in years gone by. That's how 3 men, when faced with obedience to a king or their life, they had obedience to their God when they were in a blazing furnace. How did they stand before God? How did they make that stand? Because they knew the character of God. When Moses was faced with living for pleasure of this world or living for the people of God, How did he stand? How did he make that right choice? He made that right choice because he knew the character of God. They knew their God's character of justice. They knew God's character of authority. They knew God's concern and care for them in their personal life. And they stood for God ultimately because they knew the character of God, and then they trusted in that character. And so here, as Jesus is preparing the disciples to go out, and they're going to face many things. He's given them power even over to cast out devils. I've never met a demon. Don't really want to meet a demon. Okay? But that's some serious things, right? And he says, hey, you can trust me. Here are some truths to stand on. Lord willing, I'm going to be back next week, and we're going to look at the next 3 truths the Lord has given us to stand on. But can I encourage you here today? Take these 3 truths, whittle them down to one. Decide on one. Say, you know what, Lord, help me to focus on this one this week. Maybe it's the value, the Lord values you. Maybe it's realizing that we are living for eternity, and where our soul is going to end up is more important than our bodies. And maybe verse 26, that realizing that we need to speak up for the Lord, and give the gospel and such. I don't know how the Lord has used that in your heart and life, but let's take here just a few moments and apply these truths to our own hearts and lives here today. I'm going to give you just a few moments. I want you to pray by yourself, pray to the Lord, and say, hey, Lord, is there an area here that I need to trust you more in? Let's do that, and then I'll close in a word of prayer. Lord, we are thankful that you are in charge. We're thankful that you are the judge of the world, but you are a judge full of character, knowing all, having complete love for us, and Lord, that you are in control. This passage of Scripture speaks so much about your sovereignty. And Lord, I'm so thankful that within your sovereignty is a great value for us, and that you know the difficulties that we that take place in our lives on a day-to-day basis. And you're even concerned about those. And we're so thankful to have a relationship with such a great God and Judge. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.